Frank and his wife Gloria have lived in Suffolk for the last 21 years. Gloria is a member of the Constancia chapter of the Daughters of the American Revolution, and Frank is on the board of governors of the American Friends of Lafayette, where they are both life members. And they are currently planning the Lafayette bicentennial commemorations for Suffolk and Somerton in February of 2025. Please welcome Frank Womble.
I'd like to thank my good friend Jimmy Moore for the invitation to speak with you today about Lafayette and our bicentennial plans. As he said, I'm from Rich Square, so coming to Murfreesboro is very much like coming home to me. I'm thrilled to be back here again. This is the agenda for today's presentation. I want to tell you just a little bit about the American Friends of Lafayette, who we are, and what we do. And I'll go right into Lafayette's role in the American Revolution. From there, I'll talk about the 1824, 1825 return visit to the United States, which became known as the Farewell Tour. Specifically, I'll be talking about his visit to North Carolina and why he came here in the first place. And then I will talk about his legacy and why he's important, still important, I think, to us today. I will address, of course, the Farewell Tour's bicentennial commemoration plans. I'll tell you how you can get involved in that, and after that, I'll be happy to take your questions. The American Friends of Lafayette is the oldest of the 5 Lafayette-related societies in the United States. We were formed in 1932 at Easton College in Pennsylvania by a small group of Lafayette scholars and collectors, and we have now grown to almost 1,000 members. That covers the vast majority of the United States. Most members are in North Carolina and Virginia. We foster the traditional Franco-American friendship, and we try to emphasize why Lafayette is important to our representative democracy today. And of course, with the bicentennial coming up, we have another goal. We are not doing reenactments. We are going to commemorate Lafayette's visits to the places that he visited. We are going to celebrate his legacy, and we intend to educate the public on why he is so important. The Marquis de Lafayette, who was he exactly? He was a wealthy, aristocratic, young, and extremely idealistic young Frenchman. His parents and grandparents had all died by the time he was age 13, leaving him one of the wealthiest men in France. Lafayette had a rather lengthy name. His friends and family knew him as Joubert. He gave up his title during the French Revolution, and so in the United States we know him simply as Lafayette or General Lafayette. Lafayette became captured by the idea of self-government and self-determination as propounded by Enlightenment philosophy. He decided, after reading about and hearing about what the American colonists were up to, he decided he would join the struggle for independence personally. And so, he defied a written directive from the King of France that mentioned him by name, prohibiting French officers from leaving France and serving in the American Revolution. He ignored the advice of his father-in-law to that same effect. He bought a ship with his own money and outfitted it, named La Victoire, or Victory. He failed to inform his 7 months pregnant young wife that he was leaving the country and did not know when he might return. He evaded the French authorities who were trying to stop him, and he boarded his own ship and sailed for South Carolina in mid-1777. Lafayette disembarked in South Carolina, made his way overland to Philadelphia, presented himself to the Continental Congress and said, "I'm here to serve." And they said, "Monsieur le Marquis, we thank you very much, but we simply don't need any more French officers showing up trying to assist us here." Well, thanks to the advice of Benjamin Franklin and to Lafayette's own statement that he wanted to serve without pay, the Continental Congress awarded Lafayette a commission as a 2-star general in the Continental Army. He was 19 years old and had no combat experience. George Washington was rather impressed with the young man's enthusiasm, but noting his inexperience, said, "I invite you to join my military family as an aide-de-camp." He joined Washington's staff. It's rather obvious that the Continental Congress intended for his commission to be honorary. Lafayette said, "No, not so fast. I have other ideas." He literally wanted to lead American troops into combat, and he did on several occasions. 3 months after landing in South Carolina, he was wounded at the Battle of Brandywine. He led soldiers on several other occasions. He had a significant role at the siege of Yorktown. But I will tell you this, it was not on the battlefield where Lafayette made his most significant contribution to us winning the American Revolution. He personally lobbied the French government on more than one occasion for more men, more money, more supplies, and most significantly, late in the war, returned to France to lobby again and got 4,000 additional soldiers in the Rochambeau and the critical French fleet under the Comte de Grasse. And getting that fleet resulted in this event, the Battle of the Capes on September 5th, 1781, the single most significant strategic victory of the American Revolution. The short version of this story is the French fleet hammered the British that day. 5 of their 19 ships were no longer maneuverable. One of them had to be scuttled. And so they decided, I think we'll go back to New York. So they retreated to New York, setting off a panic among the loyalists who were still there, and leaving the French fleet firmly in control of the Chesapeake Bay. 6 weeks later, Cornwallis surrendered at Yorktown, ending the last major battle of the American Revolution. President Monroe invited Lafayette to return to the United States in 1824 and 1825 as the guest of the nation. The 50th anniversary of independence was approaching. The nation was excited about that, but this came at a rather challenging time. The spirit of '76 that had carried the nation through the war had declined as the nation had expanded to the west. The first durable financial panic ever to occur here lasted for 3 years, the Panic of 1819. The 1820 Missouri Compromise was at best a temporary solution to what to do about this festering problem of the expansion of slavery into the new states and territories. And finally, the 1824 presidential election, said by historians to be the most divisive presidential election ever held in the United States. Does that sound familiar to anyone? So politics is sometimes it's what is old is new again. There were 4 candidates that year, and none of them agreed on anything, except that the nation seemed to be about to come apart at the seams. And so the truth is, America needed a hero, and Lafayette needed something too. He had failed in a multi-decade attempt to bring constitutional monarchy to France, and he wanted to see what his efforts had led to here in the U.S. Lafayette had a very simple intent. He'd come here with a small entourage. Besides himself, he'd come with his son, George Washington Lafayette, his valet, Bastien, and a very interesting fellow named Auguste Levasseur. Levasseur was Lafayette's private secretary and kept notes everywhere they went. We'll hear more from Levasseur here shortly. Lafayette planned to spend a few months here. He'd visit the major cities. He'd go to Boston, New York, Philadelphia, Washington City, and visit some old friends, people like Jefferson and Adams, and basically have a relaxed vacation. Well, that's not what happened. When Lafayette arrived in New York Harbor on August 16th of 1824, he arrived to artillery salutes from ship and shore, a harbor jammed with ships of every description, thousands of people lining the shoreline, and a welcome that has not been seen in this country before or since. New York City erupted into 4 days and nights of nearly continuous celebration. The same thing would happen in Philadelphia 6 weeks later. His relaxed visit to the United States turned into a 13-month-long, 6,000-mile tour of all 24 states and Washington City. One observer called the reception adulation bordering on hysteria. And just to give you one minor example, Lafayette was paraded from New York Harbor to City Hall down Broadway. That trip should have taken about 20 minutes. It took 2 hours because of the crowd estimated at 50,000 people that jammed the parade route. That parade set the precedent for future triumphal parades in New York City. We have a wealth of primary source information about what Lafayette did during the farewell tour. One of the most important sources is a book by none other than Auguste Levasseur, Lafayette's private secretary. When they got back to France 4 years later in 1829, Levasseur published this book in 2 volumes, and it was also published in English in Philadelphia and New York City. It remains an important document, a reported source for historians today. We also have extensive newspaper coverage. There was no radio, no telephone, no television, no telegraph. So people got their news from newspapers. And there were lots of them, and they covered his movements in detail, including here in Murfreesboro, which is covered in the Norfolk and Portsmouth Herald. When Lafayette arrived in New York City, I mentioned he would be here about 4 months. There was no intent for him to visit any state south of Virginia. So what was he doing here? Well, the governors and the congressional representatives of the southern and western states demanded a visit from Lafayette. So while he was in Washington City over the winter of 1824-25, his son, George Washington Lafayette, sat down with the Postmaster General of the United States and planned a route through the Deep South and what was then called the West, states like Missouri. This is going to be a challenge. Not only is the route difficult, there are now 2 time constraints. Cannot leave Alexandria until after George Washington's birthday celebration on February 22nd, and must be in Boston on June 17th to lay the cornerstone of the Bunker Hill Monument for the 50th anniversary of that event in his role as a Mason. If you were leaving Washington today en route to Raleigh, you would simply take the interstate highways and you'd be there in 4.5 to 5 hours. That was not the case in 1825. Roads south of Richmond were described as badly broken. They were so bad that an alternative route, fortunately for us in Murfreesboro, an alternative route was planned. Lafayette would take a relaxing 2-day steamboat ride down the Potomac River in the Chesapeake Bay. He would get off in Norfolk. He would switch to a coach, and he would take the lower sandy road through my current hometown of Suffolk and come right here to Murfreesboro. Lafayette arrived in Norfolk on February 25th at around 1 o'clock in the morning. They'd already had ceremonies back in October, so they didn't do the ceremonies. He went to the city hotel, rested for a few hours, got on a coach, came to Suffolk, where he was entertained at a banquet and stayed overnight. The next day, here's where you come in. The next day, he left Suffolk, en route to Murfreesboro, and ran smack into the 3-man Murfreesboro delegation near Somerton. And so they all retired to the Washington Ordinary, where they had a midday meal, and then they continued from there on down towards Murfreesboro. When they got to the state line, the North Carolina Official State Welcoming Committee from Raleigh was conspicuous by their absence. They were not there. They had been delayed by the same bad roads that would delay Lafayette's arrival in Murfreesboro. As you can see from this map, Lafayette did indeed take the lower sandy road, came through Murfreesboro, went over to Halifax, turned south to go to Rocky Mount, and from there southwest to Raleigh and to Fayetteville. He would spend 8 days here in North Carolina. Your Lafayette will be portrayed by Dr. Samuel Powell. Dr. Powell has been in the Sons of the American Revolution since 1998, and you will see him here in Murfreesboro. Lafayette's trip into North Carolina did not get off to a great start. It had been raining for several days, the roads were in bad shape. You are probably aware, since you're in the Historical Society, that when he arrived outside of town, he got stuck in the mud up to the axles. Levasseur noted that the horses seemed to have taken root there and could not be budged. And so it took over an hour for them to extricate from the mud. They arrived here in Murfreesboro rather late, around 9 p.m., and were welcomed by bonfires and torchlight here in the center of town. And I want to give you a quote from Levasseur about their arrival here because it's so interesting to me. You can hear the frustration in his voice. Quote, "Finally we arrived, and we were very amply compensated by the cordial hospitality of the citizens of Murfreesboro, who spared nothing to prove to General Lafayette that the citizens of North Carolina were no less sincerely attached to him than those of the other states." And I can tell you that a compliment like that from Levasseur is rare. Lafayette is returned to Murfreesboro. He will be welcomed at Town Hall in a ceremony that echoes the welcome he received here in 1825. And one more quote for you from local lawyer Thomas Manning. That night, Manny said to Lafayette, "To you, next to dear great Washington, we are indebted for the triumph of our arms. We salute you as the father of our common country, and we hail you also as a benefactor of the human race and gallant champion of the rights of men." I'm hoping to hear that again on February 25th. That will be followed by a reception across the street here at Hertford Academy. The next day, Lafayette continued on towards Northampton Courthouse, and he stopped, we think unexpectedly, near Conway at Zion Church. He probably stopped to water his horses at Patty's Delight Creek. I have a personal interest here because my ancestors on the farm owned the farm adjacent to Zion Church, and I'm related to the Flies, who are still members of this church. Currently, there's no event planned here. Lafayette proceeded on to Northampton Courthouse, today we know as Jackson, where finally the North Carolina State Rugby delegation appeared. They had sent a courier from Halifax, where they were located, to Murfreesboro. They had discovered that Lafayette was here, sent a courier back, and decided they could meet him there in Jackson. So he was met there by Chief Justice John Taylor and reunited with Colonel William Polk, who he fought with at the Battle of Brandywine. This mural by Napoleon Hill depicts that arrival. The carriage in this mural is based on the one you have here in Murfreesboro. Lafayette will return to Jackson. He'll be welcomed there. He'll come by carriage again midday. He'll be welcomed at the courthouse, and there will be ceremonies at Lafayette Park, directly across the street. There will also be a period costume luncheon at the Bayside Restaurant before he continues on to Halifax. Lafayette went to Halifax same day, where they have an embarrassment of riches. They have not one but two buildings that Lafayette actually saw or stayed in. Lafayette was banqueted at the Eagle Tavern. He stayed there overnight. And he also visited the Masons at Royal White Hart Lodge No. 2. The building depicted here is the building that Lafayette visited. This is one of the oldest Masonic lodges in North Carolina. Lafayette will return to Halifax. We are not going to recreate the crossing of the Roanoke River because it's a little too dangerous. So we're not doing that. And Lafayette will come to town by carriage and be housed by a candidate, as happened 200 years ago. A descendant of Major Allen Davy, who welcomed Lafayette 200 years ago, will be giving the welcome speech in Halifax. And there'll be a dinner at the Hen and the Hog restaurant that evening. Lafayette stayed overnight in Halifax, and then he continued on and stopped just outside town at the Grove. The Grove was the home of Revolutionary War statesman Wally Jones. Lafayette met his widow there, Mary Jones. Her daughter was the wife of Governor Burton in North Carolina. And so they had a little reunion there. It's said to be very emotional. Unfortunately, the Grove collapsed in the early 1900s. There's no suitable venue here. We do not plan an event. Lafayette continued on to Enfield, where he stopped for lunch and greeted locals who were there at the home of Joseph Branch, called the Cellar. The Cellar still stands. It's an event venue now, and so they're going to hold a luncheon there, echoing the luncheon that Lafayette enjoyed in Enfield before he continued on to Falls of the Tar. Lafayette went to Falls of the Tar and stayed at either the tavern or the residence, not sure which one, of Henry Donaldson. He was entertained at a dinner, and he witnessed a thing called a Maisie dance, which was a country line dance popular in the 19th century. Lafayette will return to Rocky Mountain. The Mickachuck Petway chapter, Daughters of the American Revolution, will rededicate the 1933 marker that marks the site of Henry Donaldson's tavern. And that evening, they will be holding, along with the sponsorship of the Masonic Lodge there, they will be holding a dinner and dance at the Powerhouse at the Mills. Lafayette continued from there on to Rogers Crossroads to the tavern of Allen Rogers. We don't know much about this stay except the fact that he stayed there. Don't think it was at this house, but one of the Rogers family homes still stands there, and it's one of the oldest homes in North Carolina. Rogers Crossroads has changed a lot. It's now called Wake Crossroads, and it's not out in the country anymore. It's now a suburb of Raleigh. So there's no suitable venue here at the Crossroads, but local lore says that Lafayette stopped at Isaac Hunter's Tavern right before arriving in Raleigh. That tavern is now the site of the North Raleigh Hilton. And so we plan to have a dinner there, a dinner and dance at North Raleigh Hilton. Lafayette arrived in Raleigh on March 2nd to a grand welcome, escorted by cavalry, artillery salutes. He was entertained at the governor's mansion. And he also went to the Capitol building where he viewed the statue of Washington, the Canova marble statue. You're probably aware that that statue was destroyed when the Capitol burned. But there is a replica of it there by Antonio Villa. And so we will duplicate the event there where Lafayette viewed the statue of Washington. We'll also be having a dinner and ball at the Raleigh Marriott City Center in downtown Raleigh that evening. Haywood Hall is the oldest home still standing inside the city limit, the original city limits of the city of Raleigh. Family lore says that Lafayette visited there. You hear that a lot. We don't have any primary source evidence that said he was there. However, it is an event venue, and we plan to have a breakfast there, replicating the breakfast that he enjoyed with Colonel Polk, whose home no longer exists there at all. Fayetteville has its own Lafayette Society. So needless to say, they are highly enthusiastic about the return of Lafayette. Fayetteville is the only time in the United States named for Lafayette that he actually visited. He arrived there. This is another great quote I have just got to read for you. Levasseur again. The weather was dreadful. The rain fell in torrents, and yet several miles from the city, the road was covered with men and children on horseback and militiamen on foot. In the city, the streets were covered with a crowd of ladies dressed in all their finery who were rushing in cautiously across the rivulets to approach the general's carriage, so seized by the pleasure of gazing on him that they didn't appear to notice the deluge that seemed destined to engulf them. And that's the kind of enthusiasm that Lafayette's arrival inspired. So Lafayette is coming back to Fayetteville, and he will be welcomed there again with an artillery salute, a procession, and a color guard, and paraded to the center of town to the market house. The Fayetteville Independent Light Infantry, one of the oldest military units in the United States, will accompany Lafayette in the procession just as they did 200 years ago. Lafayette's also having two signature events, a ball on March 4th at the Cape Fear Botanical Garden, and the following night, a dinner at the same place. So like I said, they are highly enthusiastic about what they plan to do there for Lafayette. So I want to talk a little bit about, well, I should back up a step. That concluded Lafayette's visit to North Carolina. He departed the next day for Cheraw, South Carolina. We're not sure where he spent the night. He may have traveled all night long because of the length of that journey. I do want to talk a little bit about, well, what's the point of all this? Why? It's all, if you're a historian, it's all very interesting. But what's the point? Well, the point is that Lafayette left us with a legacy in this country that is probably not matched by any civil or military leader. He spent his entire adult life in the pursuit of three great ideas: liberty, equality, and what he called natural rights, what we call universal human rights. He was the foremost abolitionist of his time when that was not a popular stance to have. He supported women's rights at a time when women had few legal rights. He supported religious freedom for Protestants in France who were being persecuted. And having spent 5 years himself in an Austrian prison during the French Revolution, he supported criminal justice reform. He was strongly opposed to solitary confinement and the death penalty. He had a mutual respect with indigenous peoples. Several tribes, just forgot who they were. But the Oneida and the Tusker War fought with Lafayette during the war. He was personally involved in not one, not two, but three revolutions, our own revolution here and two revolutions in France. He was directly involved in the founding principles of this country and of modern day French Republic. And he does not get enough credit for this last bullet. He co-authored, along with Thomas Jefferson, the first draft of the Declaration of the Rights of Man and the Citizen in 1789. That document forms the preamble to the French Constitution today. Now, why is he still important to us? Well, we don't have a king. We don't have a parliament. We don't have a prime minister. We have a duly elected government of the people. Then the truth is, had it not been for French involvement, we would have lost the American Revolution. And as late as the summer of 1780, we were losing the war. Charleston had fallen to a British siege. We'd lost the battle of Camden, and things were not looking very good. 16 months later, victory at Yorktown. Why? Because of the French. And I think it's worth remembering that we talk a lot about our special relationship with our British cultural cousins. It's worth remembering that we fought 2 wars against them in a 40-year period, and our oldest allies are the French. And finally, I think most importantly, the struggle for human rights and self-determination that Lafayette supported all of his life still continues today. And I have a shameless commercial ad for you before I conclude, and that's this beautiful bicentennial calendar. It's right here on our podium. This happens to be for sale by your old association, and it makes a wonderful Father's Day present. It features 20 beautiful period images, and it's also the only calendar that has on each day of the farewell tour the significant places Lafayette visited that day. You can get involved in this. You can come join us at events. You should have this little rack card at your place. In the back of it, you will find the 4 events that we're having in Suffolk. We cordially invite you to come join us. We would love to have you there. Tell your friends, and this is not a recruiting drive, but we love new members. We'd be happy to have you as a member of the American Friends of Lafayette. We do have a website that's specifically devoted to the events of the bicentennial. And finally, author David Clary said that, in his opinion, it was impossible to imagine the revolution turning out in the way it did without either Washington or Lafayette. He goes on to say, it was not the 2 of them acting individually, it was the 2 of them acting together. I'll be happy to take your questions. Over here. Yes, ma'am.
James Armstead.
James Armstead. It's a very interesting story about James Armstead. James Armstead was an enslaved black man that Lafayette engaged as a spy. And portraying himself as an escapee, he went to Cornwallis's camp at Yorktown, where no one thought he was any kind of a risk. Nobody thought much of him at all. He just stood there and listened as Cornwallis and his staff discussed their plans and passed freely back and forth from camp to camp. At the end of the war, Lafayette wrote a letter to the Congress that encouraged Armstead's freedom, and he took the name James Fayette in honor of Lafayette, and became free.
What was there a country somewhere he helped free a group of people? Was it Liberia? Somewhere he was able to get
in the Caribbean.
In the Caribbean. Lafayette and his wife, during the French Revolution, bought a plantation that had enslaved laborers. And his intent was did 2 things actually. They stopped planting sugarcane because it was labor intensive and very difficult to farm for the laborers. And they switched to farming nutmeg, and he said we need to educate and pay these people to allow for their eventual emancipation. That effort failed when Lafayette's properties were seized during the French Revolution. Anyone else? She's trying to tell me something. Oh, the map, I bet. Okay, I failed to mention this when I said the 13-month tour. You also have a flyer from the American Friends of Lafayette that on the inside has a map of Lafayette's route, and on the back mentions the places that we visited. And I'm going to take one more minute here, Jimmy. I often get asked this question: did Lafayette have any descendants? Well, he got married when he was 16 and his wife was 14, and they had 4 children. Now, unfortunately, the youngest one died at less than 2 years old. The other 3 did have descendants, and Lafayette's descendants currently live in France, Italy, and Belgium. And one of them is this man. The King of the Belgians, the head of a constitutional monarchy, is a Lafayette descendant. King Philippe has 4 children. Obviously, they are also Lafayette descendants. And his oldest child is this remarkable young woman, who was the 2nd lieutenant in the Belgian army, perhaps echoing Lafayette's military career. Yes.
Not a question, but we just learned yesterday that 3 of Lafayette's descendants are going to come to New York at the beginning of the celebrations, and it's their first time in the United States. So I think that's pretty cool.
Anyone else have a question for me? I thank you for your kind, yes, sir.
Does your group have any coordination with the Society of Cincinnati?
Yes, sir. We are, I'll digress just a moment. We have a formal relationship with the Daughters of the American Revolution. And we coordinate closely with the Masons and the Society of Cincinnati. And so, yes, there are a number of patriotic, and the Sons of the American Revolution as well. There's a number of patriotic organizations involved in the bicentennial. Anyone else? Well, I thank you very much for your kind attention. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Frank, and I want to give you a small token of our appreciation. This is the latest publication from our publications committee. It's the riddle of the first American novel, William Hill Brown and the Power of Sympathy.
Well, that was interesting.
And he died right here.
Well, thank you very much. I look forward to reading it.